Opening YouTube now.
Hi everyone, Sharon from Sydney here. Hi, I'm just going to run you.
I just want to make sure that YouTube is doing.
Okay.
Mahi, it's live, so it goes straight away to YouTube. Can you check it here, please? Check. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Sorry. Can go.
Hi everyone. Morning from Sydney or evening your time. My name is Sharon Swift, and I'm going to help you just with a few tips and my 6 steps on how you should be moving to Australia and the things that you need to be thinking about. So I'm just going to pop you over to my screen and just talk you through a few slides about moving to Australia. So, who am I? I am a global nomad. I'm a passionate traveller, and I've moved around quite a bit myself. I've actually, in my lifetime, made 18 international relocations to countries including Brazil, Trinidad, and Egypt, through to the UK, Canada, and US. So I've moved around quite a bit, and I actually moved to Sydney in Australia in 2005. So I'm coming up to my 9-year anniversary here. And my job is, I actually run a business which helps executives relocate to Australia. I work in particular with the spouses and the family to make sure that they all are able to settle into their new life here. I've also written a book, so I'm author of a new book called So You're Moving to Australia, which covers my 6 essential steps on how to move down under. Oh. So, this is my life, and you can see here that there is myself and my husband eating and drinking. That's what we love to do. We live in Sydney with our little puppy. Well, he's not a puppy anymore. Our little doggy called Dylan. So this is my lifestyle. Of course, it's always sun shining in Sydney with the harbour bridge there in the background in the water. So I just thought I'd run you through what I'm going to cover, and I'm just going to take about 10 minutes just to run you through my 6 essential steps on when you're making an international move and what to think about, really. Lots of questions. So I'm just hoping to touch on life in Australia, the cost of living, moving and settling in here. The culture is quite different. Essentials, and then at the end I'm going to leave you with some tips and useful resources just so that you can refer back to some useful websites and places to go for a bit more information. So before you take the leap, you're probably feeling a bit like this, wondering, you know, what information is relevant and where you should be finding information. And it's an exciting time, so you need to make sure that you do the proper research. So I'm going to run you through my 6 steps, and now this is based on my extensive experience and my 18 international relocations, but also my work with lots of expats who have moved to Australia from overseas. So I found that there are 6 steps that people need to think about, and my first one is before you even leave, you need to size up. There are things that you need to be thinking about, and I'll just give you a few hints and tips about the sorts of things that you need to be considering. The second step is to embark. So when you're ready to leave, there's obviously the preparation and planning. When you arrive, you need to take up residence. You need to set up your home and routine. Then you need to tackle the necessities and make sure that you make all of the registrations and administration, so your medical, your tax, your driving licenses, and so on. And then once you start to settle in, you'll need to start learning the ropes. You'll need to start understanding the culture and the environment that you're in. And then obviously you're going to want to explore and discover. You're going to want to get out and about and make the most of your life here in Australia. So I'll just start off with the step, which is size up. So these are the things you need to be thinking about. Obviously, there's timing, is this the right time in your life, distance, with regards to friends and family. But most importantly, at the top of everyone's list is how can I actually legally live and work in Australia? So there are a few ways you can do that. You can become a permanent resident, which is a long route, and this is basically dependent on skills. There are a few other criteria like investing in business and so on. It's really best for you to determine the best way that you can become a resident. And there's a whole heap of criteria like your age, English language ability, your skills, the money you have to invest, and so on. And there's different criteria for different visas, so it's really important that you speak to a professional about what is right for you. Another way that a lot of people choose to come over is on a 457 visa, and that means that you have an employer who is willing to sponsor you for a certain job in a certain role at a certain salary point around about the 45 to 50,000 Australian dollar mark, the last time I checked, and they will sponsor you, and this takes normally a couple of months versus applying for residency, which can take between a year and 2 years. So it really depends on how you can come over. Australians, obviously we love, having working holiday guys over here. You can work for a couple of months and also have the right to actually travel in the country for up to a year. This is very dependent on your age. You have to be 30 years old or under. And obviously you can come over here to study as well. We have lots of people, and students come over to our universities. So those are the sort of 4 main ways that you can really think about coming over here. Outside of being a tourist, which is valid for 3 months, but you can't actually work. So those are the 4 ways that you can legally work and actually gain an income when you're here in Australia. So obviously the next step is really to think about how you're going to earn that income. Australia is an expensive country, so you need to think about the costs. So the visa application fees, they could be quite high for some categories, so make sure that you think about those. Obviously there's the cost of moving itself. The flights themselves can be thousands of dollars, so obviously you need to throw that into the mix. Accommodation, lifestyle is expensive here, and I always advise that people have at least 2 to 3 months rent in advance, plus additional living costs before you even think about whether you want to live comfortably in Australia. My next step is to embark, so to start planning your trip. So you need to think about your pets. If you have a property, if you're renting, you need to obviously give your landlord the appropriate notice period. If you've got a car, you'll need to sell it or hand it back. Obviously, the visa is another major consideration at this point. And here in Australia, you also, for certain industries, such as medical industries, teaching, engineering, law, accountancy, for example, even insurance types of industries, you actually need to register your skills and have them recognized by the appropriate bodies before you can practice in that role. So just make sure that you check that out with your visa, and that if you actually want to practice as a lawyer or a doctor, for example, you need to make sure that your skills are recognized here before you are licensed to practice and earn an income from that particular job. Obviously, you need to think about things like deciding what to bring, booking your flights and accommodation, and there's lots of administration at this point that you need to consider. So what is your tax liabilities where you are, and obviously when you're in Australia, you're going to be liable for tax, so you want to make sure that you're not double paying and that you've closed up matters where you're living at the moment. And you also need to gather a lot of crucial paperwork. There is a lot of bureaucracy here and a lot of form filling and proving your identity when you move to a new country. So the paperwork, the certificates, your university certificates, for example, any of your qualifications, your driving licenses, any of your records like your birth certificate, your resume and your CV all need to be up to date and up to scratch before you can land and actually start applying for jobs, bank accounts, and so on. So my next step is, once you've, you sort of made the leap, you've flown over here, you need to take up residence. You need to set up your home and your routine, just so that you can quickly get into the swing of things and get into life here. In order to rent a property, you need proof of ID, you need a bank account, proof of income, and so on. And in some cases, advance rent of up to 6 months can actually be the difference between you securing an apartment or a house or not. It's a very competitive rental market here. There are lots of people applying for every single property, so you just need to think about basically a rental application and all of your supporting evidence to make you look like an ideal renter. Obviously, you need to find a job. And just a little bit more of a breakdown of the cost that you need to think about in your first few months here. So obviously you've got your rental or accommodation costs. You need to think about food, entertainment, your phone, transport. Transport isn't that expensive here, public transport wise, but obviously if you want to buy a car or if you want to fly around, you need to think about those sorts of things. If you need to buy appliances or furniture, or in emergencies or medical scenarios, obviously you need to think about a bit of a safety net fund, to help you through those times. Now, just coming back to the appliances and furniture, most apartments or houses will actually have an oven and a dishwasher if that's something that the landlord wants to offer, but you will need to furnish most properties here in Australia. They do. About 90 to 95% of them will actually come unfurnished, especially at the cheaper end of the market. So once you've got a roof over your head and you're happy and you're settled, you need to tackle the necessities, and these are really crucial. And this is probably stuff that you've not thought about for a few years. Things like getting together your driving license, getting together your passport, bank account, all of this paperwork needs to be gathered because you need what's called a 100-point identification, which means you need evidence to prove who you are. When you move over here, your credit rating and everything will start from scratch. So the Australian authorities and companies like banks need to be sure that you are who you are. When you're moving over here, obviously you're going to move over some money, and I would suggest that you consider using a currency broker versus a bank, especially if you're going to pretty much move more than $500 to $1,000. I would highly suggest that you go with a currency broker versus a bank. It's much cheaper, you'll be liable for less fees, and it's actually quite an easy process once you're set up. So I think about that to save quite a bit of money. So once you're here, obviously you need to register with the tax office. The Australians, are actually a very heavily taxed country. The income tax can range for between 30 to 50% of your income, depending on how much you earn. And they won't let you forget that this is a liability. So make sure that you register with a tax file number. You need to make sure that you're driving here legally. If you're on a temporary visa, then you're not required at this point to get a driver's license, an Australian driver's license. You can actually travel on your home driving license, but if you're a resident, then you have a 3-month grace period. So little things like that you need to think about. And obviously from a medical point of view, you absolutely must register for Medicare, and you need to think about whether you're going to register for health insurance as well for the larger bills, just to have a safety net there. And obviously, you need to get a mobile phone. In the first instance, you're probably going to have a prepaid mobile phone because you don't have a credit rating here. So just a few things to think about. So once you moved over and you're settled and you're just trying to learn the ropes, this is my sort of phase where again, you've got a roof over your head, you're all registered and happy. You need to learn the ropes. You need to understand how things work here before you can really feel at home. So the dress is normally quite casual. Obviously, due to our weather, we have beautiful weather over here in most of Australia. So a lot of people prefer to be very casual. And you'll see these in the images that you have of Australia overseas. Business attire is normally quite traditional, so depending on the working environment, you can consider that it will be fairly normal business attire compared to your home country. You need to think about your electrics, hair dryers, you know, phone chargers and so on. All of those sorts of things you need to think about so you don't get stuck. Language, slang and abbreviations. Australians love to abbreviate things and to have slang. So that's a first thing. Not only you know, is the language very different, but we do actually have different variations on English and they use slang. Sports obsessed and patriotic. Aussies are absolutely obsessed with sport. If they're not talking about it, they're watching it, and you know, they're making fun of you know, teams that have lost, and you know, you know, whether it's swimming or cricket or football or soccer or rugby, they're absolutely obsessed with sport. So just, you know, think about that. And one thing that I found really difficult to get used to was actually that there are drought and fire restrictions here. You know, there are severe issues in most of the country, probably about 90% of the country, with a shortage of water, and there is a high risk of fire. So that's one thing to think about. It's on the top of everyone's mind, especially during the hot summer months. And in terms of media, you've got very high online usage. Down in Australia, Aussies love to gossip, so a lot of the newspapers and magazines have lots and lots of gossip, and a lot of the media, apart from magazines, are actually by state, so they're very regional based. Australia is massive. It's actually about the size of the USA, so obviously media is going to be quite specific to each region. And the TV, you've got free TV. You don't need a license or anything to watch TV. You can just turn it on and tune in. And we do actually have satellite television as well for your movies and your sport. So once you're here, you're probably imagining, you know, you've got sunny beaches and, you know, blue skies, and you're going to start to want to explore and discover. Hopefully you can read this slide. Aussies have a massive cafe culture, whether it's you're in Darwin in the Northern Territories or whether you're in Sydney or Melbourne metro regions. People love to eat out and have a cafe culture, and obviously a lot of that is based outside. Alcohol, we love our grog, as Aussies call it, whether it's wine or beer or spirits. People love alcohol, and you also see the initials BYO quite often. That means you can bring your own alcohol, whether it's beer or wine, to restaurants. So that's quite a common and popular option here. Obviously, a lot of life here is all around the beach, barbecue, parks, and open spaces. It's a very family-orientated and very outdoorsy culture, as you will probably expect. There are lots of beautiful national parks, which not many people expect, but beautiful historic areas. But it's big, and you know, if you want to travel, you need to think about the scale of the country. And from one side of the country to the other, from Perth to Sydney, is 5 hours, and the closest international flight is 3 hours. For example, going to Bali in Indonesia, or if you want to go to New Zealand or Fiji. So some overseas countries are actually closer to Australia than other Australian cities. So just think about that. Domestic airlines, you've got Jetstar, Virgin, and of course Qantas, and those international types of airlines. And if you're thinking about your social life here, it's not as easy as people think to meet people, so you need to be heavily involved in networking, expat meetups. If you're a student, then obviously you can meet people through your studies and so on. But it's really important to get stuck in to the social side of things, just so that you feel less isolated. And in terms of shopping, I mean, I've just put here that, you know, a lot of people here are very familiar now with online shopping. A lot of shops deliver, you know, from overseas, and obviously there are, you know, the standard department stores and supermarkets. But don't expect the same range that you have overseas. Australia, whilst it's a very large country, the population is still very small. So we're still catching up in terms of having the product offering that you may have in your home country. So that's the end of where I am. So if you're stuck, just by all means, you're probably feeling a bit like this, overwhelmed. I've got some more useful resources for you here that you can refer to. So just, reading more about the country. If you're, interested about income and money matters, then here are a few useful websites on how to find a job, set up a business, what salary you can expect to be earning. And if you're leaving from the UK in particular, or your own country, then you can look up certain elements from your home country websites. Obviously, the visas and immigration, there are two key websites I would urge you to visit. That's the government website, but also you might want to help from a migration agent if you're not getting an employer sponsorship. So just to get a bit of advice there. I've actually got some free resources on my website, which you can go onto and download checklists, free chapters of my book, and so on. And there's just some more here: sports and leisure, socializing, cost of living, education, and accommodation. So there are just a few useful websites for you to refer to after this hangout. And of course, there's a copy of my book. It is available on Amazon, so by all means, go there and have a look. And that covers in detail every single thing that you need to be thinking about within my 6 steps. So does anyone have any questions?
No, I don't think so, maybe.
So that's it. Thank you and goodbye. My motto is to help people move their life and discover home. And thanks to Room in the Moon for organising this in conjunction with the Expat Concierge. That's my business. And just a couple of websites for you to refer to after this event.
Thank you, Sharon.
Thanks, everyone.
It was great to hearing your tips and advice about Australia. Thanks for your participation. So I think it's my time now.
Yeah.
I'm Anna. I started my traveling around the world 10 years ago when I decided to move to London to learn English. And as many people, we just decided to learn the language and then go back to our country. And then I spent 2 years in London and started to travel around. And I loved the culture, to meet people from many countries, different cultures, religions, try many kind of food that I never imagined. So many different things to do in London all the time. So I was totally in love for this country. And then after 2 years, I was missing my country a lot, and then I decided to go back to Brazil. Back to my career. I am a journalist, and I used to work for newspapers and press release agencies. And I miss a lot my routine and my friends and my family. And again, as many people, I couldn't feel like at home again in my own country. It's something very popular. Then we can start to meet people and hearing their stories as well. And then we see that it's not only me, but it's something that's really happened. It call it cultural reversal shock when we don't adapt again to our culture. And then apart, I spent a long time again in Brazil doing journalism and blogging. I started a blog on that time when I started to tell my experiences about traveling around. It helps me a lot as well to keep in touch with other travelers and other people who had the same experience than me. And so it was easier to challenge, to live again my life in trying to go back to the track after go back there. Then my blog was just going well, and then I keep traveling in my holidays, but I always feel the same feeling to move abroad again, to go again to know different people, different cultures, and try to have opportunity in my career as well. It was when I decided to move to Australia in 2010. So after my first experience living abroad, I decided to move again after 6 years for what I think it was a totally different country, Australia. But if you compare now London, my experience in London and my experience in Sydney, when I get there when I got there 6 years ago, 6 years after the first experience, what I could see, everything was really, really similar. Because apart the language that is the same, the culture is really similar. The Australia, it's English colonization, British colonization. So many aspects we can see they are really similar. My first shock when I was in Sydney was to discover about the real Australia and the Aboriginals. Because when we think about Australia, when we read about, when we see the articles, magazines and books, most of people and most of the things that you read about Australia, it's about to go to the beach, people, all the very beautiful places around, the nature, sports. As Sharon spoke in her talk, she was talking people are totally addicted to sports. You can see people running, cycling. You can see lots of people practicing sports all the time. So that's the vision that I have when you think about Australia. And I was so surprised when I got there and I started to learn about the real Australia, the Aboriginal one. They were the first people who they discovered in Australia. They kind of the Indians in Australia. So even they are living in the bush, in the small cities or in the central Australia, Alice Springs, we still can see some of them in the big cities and like Sydney, Perth, and the other touristy places. So from there, I started to learn about the history about Australia. And so this was my first shock. And then after that, I always thought Australians, they are totally similar to Brazilians, for example. They are always happy, smiling. They're going a lot to the beach. They love the coast and they love to practice sports. And then I always thought like, oh, my first experience was in London. So probably in Australia, they are totally different. But actually, no. We have a very similar culture, like much similar than, for example, countries from the Middle East or from Asia. But actually, as a new country, people were totally different as well. So what I could see living with Australians and working with Australians, most of my friends from there, they growing up with the same friends from college and from school. So at the beginning, it's a bit difficult to break the barrier to go to a group and to start to spend a time with the locals. So for me, it was a bit difficult at the beginning because they usually, as they spend most of their times together, it's not really easy to go through if you don't play the same sports than them, or if you don't have a very, very close friend to introduce you to someone, then you can start to get more closer of them. So this was the first thing that I noticed with them. They are really closer of each other and they're growing up in groups. So it was a bit difficult. So to broken that, what I started to do, I started to discover groups of travelers, even Australians living in other cities. So it was the best way to have more proximity and to start to have a relationship, friendship, and working together and try to understand the slangs and the way they talk. Then everything started to be much better, much easier to spend a time with them. Second, working with them was a bit difficult at the beginning as well, even because the language being English, the slangs and the way they talk is totally different from the American English that I used to learn in my country, or even the experience that I have in England speaking the British English. So the accent was so strong that at the beginning it was so difficult for me to understand their language. And they joke, the Australians joke a bit that they have two languages. They speak English and they speak Australian. That's funny because sometimes even my Australian friends, they didn't understand each other. So it was funny because they joke of their accent itself. So for me, it was much more comfortable after that to feel better to speak the language and to say, I'm sorry, I'm not understanding. Can you repeat again? And then it starts to be much easier than the beginning. Working with them, as Sharon was talking about the visas, we always read, or you always see articles published about how easy it is to get a job in Australia for foreigners or for people who want to move there and try to find a job in their industry. For me, as a journalist or working as marketing coordinator with experience in marketing, it wasn't that easy. As the government, every year during a time, they have a list of professions that they need people to work to. So people needed to apply for this kind of job. And unfortunately, marketing or communication, they wasn't in this list. So it wasn't that easy to apply for jobs in my area. So apart, I got jobs and had experience there. It was a bit difficult to get a residence to keep working there, as they have people in Australia able, or with the Australian residents, able to work full time and to apply for these jobs. So many times we see that Australia has lots of jobs and lots of opportunities. Exactly, they do have, and they still help lots of people to get jobs and apply for this kind of job. But depends the area that you work to. So that's important to do, because many people go to Australia thinking like, okay, if they offer lots of opportunities, I will definitely get a job. So many people struggle a little bit to apply for these jobs because they don't realize that they need to follow different requests and they need to apply in different ways. So research before you go, try to get as much information as you can to get the right visa. Of course, I'm from South America, and it's totally different for people from England, for example, or United States. They speak the same language. So I believe for them it's a bit easier. Depends what they do. But I think this is something important to research before you go. My experience was amazing during 2.5 years when I worked, I studied, and I lived with people from Australia, from different parts of the country, and even traveling in Australia. I had the opportunity to travel for different areas as a journalist and curious and a blogger to know more about the country. So I've been to the South Coast, East Coast, and Western Australia, also to the Central Australia, Alice Springs and Uluru. And it was an amazing experience. If you're planning to go to Australia, even to work or to study, go prepared to travel around. It's a huge country, and you spend like hours traveling. Many depends where you go. You need to fly, otherwise you spend too much time driving or by bus. But it's an amazing experience, and I highly recommend for someone planning to have the experience to live there. The country is really safe and beautiful, and you meet people all along the way doing the same. You can rent or you can buy a camper van to travel around, and it's just amazing. You can find many people along the way. You can learn a lot, because every region, people are totally different. As a big country, they have different costumes, different everything. So it's really, really good, and it's a beautiful time. I work for Rowing the Moon. We are a startup in London. We are based in London, and we connect people who are planning to move abroad. This is the job that I applied when I came back to London in my area, trying to work with travel and with communication. And the experience to live abroad teaches you a lot. It's something that you don't learn in the university, you don't learn in your day-by-day life, but it's an experience that's really, really worth, as you can after that have an idea how the world works and how can you change all your day-by-day into main things to do. And get this job for me was amazing as a person who has the experience traveling, and the experience to understand exactly what people need to know when they go abroad, the cultural shock, the loneliness and everything that we feel when we move to another country and you don't know no one. So the idea of the website, we suggest connections in the country or in the city where you're moving to. So Ruin the Moon suggests you friends, and you can make friends. For example, if you're moving to Australia and another person from London or from South Africa want to move to Australia as well, so you can connect and you have a point of contact to have a friend when you arrive there. So everything is much easier when you know someone in the country where you're moving to. Then we recommend you, if you are planning to move, talk with people who live it there already or planning to move as well, so you can change information before you go, and everything will be much easier. Also, we are launching a campaign where you can share information about the place where you live, and you can start to post about your city, videos, photos, and information. So if you post and if you have connections, the person who has more posts and connections will win a prize, a trip, 2 weeks trip to anywhere in the world. So you can choose where you want to live, study. So you study any language like Spanish, English, Hebrew, anything that you're planning to. You just need to connect to the website. Let me just see here. How can I share with you? So as soon as you connect to the website, you just register, and then you start to post, and then you can choose the place where you're going to. So that's the idea of Ruin the Moon. You just go to your register, you fill up your registration, and then you start to share. So to check more information about the prize, check www.ruinthemoon.com/competition, so you can get more information. I hope you have enjoyed my experience. If you have more questions, I'm here. Also, you can post after in the YouTube channel as well, where you can watch again and see Sharon information. Anyone has any questions? So let's see, there is one message here. Any questions, anyone? Yeah. So I think you don't have any questions. Maybe we can wait one more minute. Yeah, I don't think so, but the video will be online in the YouTube, so you can watch anytime and ask questions anytime. Keep in touch with at ruinthemoon.com or with Sharon at Expat Concierge if you have more questions. I hope you had enjoyed our talk here today, and have a good night or day. Yes, Sharon?
Bye.
Bye-bye.